Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we're talking about Chag Sukkos, which is this week, and I was talking with my brother on the phone this morning, and he mentioned to me a question that Rav Kook discusses in his Divrei Machshava, and the question was, why is it that particularly there is a halacha in regard to Sukkah that if somebody is uncomfortable, let's say it's raining, so he's patur from Sukkah, he's exempt from Sukkah. Matter of fact, according to most shitos, and that was the feeling of Reb Chaim, that a mitzvah is patur from a Sukkah. So you don't even fulfill the mitzvah. You don't even fulfill the mitzvah of Sukkot at all. And that was the impression I had from my father. There are those that quote the Divrei Chaim, who says that you do fulfill a mitzvah, you're just not chayev to sit in the sukkah when it rains. Okay, it's somewhat difficult. I think I saw, I'm not 100% sure, that the shiurim on Masechah Sukkah that was printed up by Talmidim of my uncle, that my uncle felt it might be Tali and a Machlokas Rishonim. But why particularly is there a mitzvah, there is a din, a law, that mitzvah, that someone who has pain or is discomfort is exempt from the sukkah? Matter of fact, there's an interesting medrash pliya that Eve, was overtaken by so many sorrows, and he saw the derech. He had a vision, and in the vision he saw a sukkah of 4 walls, a sukkah of 3 walls, a sukkah of 2 walls, a sukkah of 2 walls, and a tefach, and and he. So the question is, what is the meaning of that? And I once heard from my father. I actually repeated it in at the at his Lilvaya, because my father's yard site is the second day Chalamo at Sukkos, and my father said, "Who could live in a house of 3 walls? Who could live in a house of 3 walls? Who could live in a house of 2 walls, or 2 walls and a tefach? Who could live in a house of 2 walls and a tefach? It's not a real home, but sometimes the halacha says you act as if there is a wall there, as if there is a wall there. So when some people encounter tragedy, relatives die, as happened by Eve, you you have to have the focus in your mind as if there's as if they're still there. Doesn't mean that you have to ignore reality. But there are times when you can feel the presence of, of the family members who are no longer here. And I think that this is based on the fact that, to a certain degree, Sukkot has a double motive. On one hand, and Sukkot comes immediately after Rosh Hashanah Yom HaKippurim. And I've discussed it in the past. Rosh Hashanah, the focus, there's no vidui. According to the Ari, there is a very short vidui. But for the most part, Rosh Hashanah focuses, of course, you have Malchios, Zichronos, it's remembering. Yom HaZikaron Hazeh. And it focuses on the Akedah. To a large degree, it focuses on the others. On the other hand, Yom HaKippurim, of course, we invoke the Sukkos that we already mentioned at Rosh Hashanah. And according to Chazal, Rosh Hashanah was the day of the year that Akedas Yitzchak took place. And in the Sukkos of the Avos, particularly Avram and Yitzchak, and then Rosh Hashanah, we mentioned that, but to a large degree, the focus is on our generation. It's true, we say, Aval anachnu v'avoseinu chatanu. But for the most part, even the Avoseinu chatanu, because the impact of their sin somehow was passed over to us. We make mistakes. We repeat mistakes that our ancestors made. And it's very possible that our ancestors made that mistake without having past generations to learn from. But we saw how past generations, when we look back, the vision is 2020. So Yom Kippurim, the focus is the Yom Kippurim. The focus is the focus is on the now. Those that are here today, we're focusing. The main focus is on ourselves. We're asking for kapara for the way we acted. And of course, we're focusing also on the Chag Asif is so we have in Sukkos. Sukkos has both elements in it. On one hand, it's Laman Yedu Dorosechem, in order that future generations should know, Kiba Sukkos Hoshafti Es Bnei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt. And Laman Yedu, we try to experience the Anane HaKavod, or the Sukkos Mamish, the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought in the Midbar, in the desert. On the other hand, the Chag Asif, when we take in the crops, we're focusing on what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for our generation, for us this year. So it combines, on one hand, the idea of seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the relationship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with our ancestors, on the Bris Avos. And it's interesting, Sukkos, there is a minute, of course, it's no halacha, that in the Sukkah we have the Ushpizim. We invite Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David. We invite them into the Sukkah, in a sense, from a certain perspective. And I'm not saying that everybody necessarily sees it from that perspective, but the holiday of Sukkot is one of joining with former generations, perhaps bringing those former generations. It's a question: is it that we, when we enter the Sukkah, are going back into the past, or are we bringing those former generations into the present? But whatever it is, it's linkage of the generations. However, the Chag, the holiday of Chag Osif, the gathering in of the Tfuah, we focus on what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done for us, the sustenance that He has given us. So it combines elements of both Rosh Hashanah and Yom HaKippurim. And it's very interesting, I've mentioned it before, that Rav David Tzvi Hoffman says that just like Pesach, the first Pesach, the Jews were told, Mishku v'chru, to go get the lamb for the Karban Pesach. But the Karban Pesach was eaten the evening of the 15th. So the 10th is a preparation for the 15th. So in a sense, he says Yom HaKippurim is a preparation for the 15th, for Sukkos. One would think just the reverse. One would think that Sukkos is the celebration, and it certainly is. From the Medrash Rabbah, it's very clear that Sukkos is the celebration of the belief that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us kapara. But we could say there is a double perspective. On one hand, Yom HaKippurim, and of course, the same would be true perhaps with Rosh Hashanah, that it is preparing us for Sukkos. Rosh Hashanah focuses, he doesn't say that. Rosh Hashanah focuses on Elokeinu, Elokei Avoseinu. And Yom HaKippurim focuses on the concept of Elokeinu, the personal relationship we have with God. But both of them merge together in Sukkos. The Sukkah represents the idea of Elokei Avoseinu, and the Lulav and Esrog, which could be reminiscent of the Chag Osif, the agricultural holiday. That represents the seeing HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our own lives. But this does not explain, though, the question of why Mitzdayer is Patur from Sukkah. And I would say that perhaps, and this works along what I said, that the idea, in other words, the Jewish people in the Midbar, to a certain degree, with the Sukkah, they found comfort. And we want to recognize the chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to the Jews traversing the Midbar. The Midbar is not a place where a person expects to find comfort. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the Anani HaKavod, and with the Sukkos Mamish, whatever it was, the Jewish people were able to have a certain modicum of comfort And we want to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what he did to our ancestors. Because what he did to our ancestors has an impact on us today. So therefore, mitzdayer is patur min Sukkah, is patur from Sukkah. And according to many, if you're mitzdayer, you do not even fulfill the mitzvah. However, there is a certain difficulty from the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, in discussing the mitzvah of Sukkah, so the Rambam says that why is it that there is a mitzvah of Sukkah? So he says because when we live in the Sukkah, we in a sense experience the Jewish people in the Midbar. And when we experience what the Jewish people underwent in the Midbar, we could have a greater sense of gratitude for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for Eretz Yisrael. In other words, we see in the Midbar, the Jewish people didn't have their own land. They were in a desert. Yes, the miracles, we commemorate the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made in the Midbar that gave us the ability to survive. But the main purpose, it seems from the Rambam Moreh Nevuchim, is to, in a sense, to know the hardship of the Midbar in order to appreciate going into Eretz Yisrael. And it's very interesting. Sukkos, we take the lulav and esrog, which the Rambam in other places in Moreh Nevuchim mentions, were minim, were lulav esrog, adasim, and aravos. These were plentiful in Eretz Yisrael. It reminds us of the agriculture in Eretz Yisrael. And it's part of the gift of Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people. According to some Rishonim, it's very much emphasized in this past week's Kriya of Hazinu. So the question is, according to the Rambam, if we want to emphasize, and what the Rambam says, we see in contemporary times. I remember as a boy, I'm 76 years old now, but as a boy, when the state of Israel was established, and even those that were not Zionistically oriented, those who lived in America, but they went through the war. Some were in ghettos, some were in concentration camps. Almost everybody lost relatives. Most of my friends in school were second families. And the transference from the Holocaust to the American society, the transference from the Holocaust into a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael, gave people a greater appreciation for what they had. But as the years have passed by, people are forgetting the Holocaust. And because they're forgetting the Holocaust, they don't appreciate the gift of Eretz Yisrael. And whether it's on a spiritual level, yes, there were many yeshivas in Europe. But does anybody believe that style, seeing the change that took place, that Torah in Europe would have continued till this day, even if there hadn't been a Holocaust? With all the changes that have taken place in society, people, when they evaluate things, they ignore the changes in society, and it changes in society universally. You think the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael would have been able to exist without a state of Israel? They couldn't have existed even in Europe if there hadn't been a Holocaust. So, in order to appreciate something, we have to understand what it was not to have that. And we know that the world is not tolerant of Jews. Sometimes we fool ourselves. The Jews in Hebron in 1929, when they were offered soldiers, Jewish soldiers, to protect them, they said they had a very good relationship with their Arab neighbors, with their Muslim neighbors. Only a day later, slaughtered them. And we can't forget the past, because if we forget the past, on one hand, we will repeat the mistakes of the past. But also, and this is the point the Rambam emphasizes in Moreh Nevuchim, we can't appreciate the present. And I think, so in a sense, we could suggest that the holiday of Sukkos, and the truth of the matter, it's very interesting. The 7 days of Sukkos, and I've mentioned this before, the 7 days of Sukkos commemorates the Jewish people traversing the desert, going to Eretz Yisrael. But what does Shmini Atzeres commemorate? Shmini Atzeres commemorates the Jewish people going into Eretz Yisrael after the desert. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, he doesn't say that exactly, but the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim says that Shmini Atzeres, he emphasizes that we go and we see this in the Targum, Yonasan ben Azil also. Shmini Atzeres, we go from our temporary dwelling into our permanent dwelling. So Shmini Atzeres, to a large degree, Shmini Atzeres is the celebration of Eretz Yisrael. After the Midbar, the 7 days of Sukkot, that represents the traversing of the Midbar. But Shmini Atzeres, we go commemorates going into Eretz Yisrael. We go from our temporary dwelling into our permanent dwelling. Eretz Yisrael is the permanent dwelling of the Jew. But Sukkos is the temporary dwelling of the Jew. And I've mentioned that it's a question, Rabbi Cutler gave a different answer, but the question he raised was, the Torah tells us that Yaakov, in Parshas Vayishlach, Yaakov goes with his whole family to Sukkos, and there he makes a house for himself and for his family. U'lemiknehu also Sukkos, and for his cattle, he made a sukkah, a temporary dwelling, and therefore he called the name of the place Sukkos. It's very strange. He made a house for himself and his family, and he made a barn, and not necessarily a permanent structure, a very temporary structure, barn, for his cattle, for his sheep, and therefore he called the name of the place barn. Doesn't seem to make sense. And the answer is, we see that because he was there, he stayed in the Sukkos for a year and a half, an extended period of time, instead of going immediately back to his father Yitzchak. So because of that, he was punished. But it's not that Yaakov wanted that this should be a real dwelling, even though he built a house for him and his family. But he wanted to emphasize that this settlement is a temporary settlement. It's not a permanent settlement. The permanent settlement will be when I return to my father Yitzchak. That will be my permanent settlement. So therefore, he called the name of the place Sukkos, and a sukkah is a temporary dwelling. And I think that the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, so he says the focus is not so much. Yes, there is a focus on the nisim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, that he sustained the Jewish people. But he says, as far as the sukkah is concerned, it was in order to appreciate Eretz Yisrael after we came into Eretz Yisrael. So in a sense, according to the Rambam, we could suggest that to a certain degree, all 8 days of Sukkot, including certainly Shmini Atzeres, not just Shmini Atzeres commemorates Eretz Yisrael, but all 8 days of Sukkot commemorates Eretz Yisrael. But the focus of the Sukkah seems to be the hardship that the Jewish people had in the Midbar. In order that we should appreciate Eretz Yisrael, a land that has everything in it, it's agriculture and everything else. So we have to understand why this focus on mitzdayer patur min sukkah, that a person. But it's like I said, we do not go back in time. There are times when re-experiencing means going back in time. And there are times not that we go back in time, but according to the Rambam, we're looking back. We, the Jews of the era of Eretz Yisrael, Unfortunately, I have difficulty in saying we, the Jews of Eretz Israel, when I live in Chutz La'aretz. But we, the Jewish people in the Erev Eretz Israel, who have a Jewish state, we could look back and see what was the lot of the Jewish people before they had their own state. When they had pogroms without a Jewish army to defend them. I've mentioned many times about how my cousin, Rabbi Soloveichik, and others have mentioned how the European Jews, even after they came to America, they cried in Yom Kippurim because Yom Kippur was something. They had this idea that their destiny was dependent on Yom Kippurim. And we, American Jews, we don't cry because we feel secure. But we have to appreciate what we have. And sometimes, in order to appreciate what we have to look back. There is a there's a story about a person who was very poor. His clothes were torn. He was wearing rags. I heard this story. But then somehow, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help, his luck changed over 180 degrees. Became very rich, had a lot of real estate. And he took his rags, and he had one closet in his bedroom. And he took all his rags and kept it there. And his wife was very upset why he still keeps these rags. Why doesn't he throw out these rags? And she would complain time and time again to him. And he said to her, after many times that she complained, I want to tell you why. You know, I look at all my property. I look at my wealth. I look at my family. And sometimes I forgot from what I came from. So I open up the closet to remember. Sometimes, in order to appreciate our house, our environment, we have to open up the closet. We have to remember. The traversing of the Midbar, that represents the gullus of all the generations. Traveling. In the Midbar, we don't have, in gullus, we don't have one place. We go from country to country. We're thrown out. We become very comfortable. Our fellow Jews come close to royalty. They have connections with the leaders of the countries. And sometimes overnight, they have to leave the country. And those are the lucky ones. We're forgetting about the Jews that were burnt at the stake. So in order to appreciate what we have, we figuratively have to open the door of the closet as well. Because somehow we sometimes use time, the passage of time, that was somebody else. That wasn't me. I am a different person. Like the Baal Tshuva. Ani eini osesh. But here it's used in a negative way. We don't want to appreciate what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. We want to attribute it to ourselves. That's how the Rambam understood the mitzvah of Sukkah. But, so the question is, why is it that Mistar is Patur in a Sukkah? The answer is, as I mentioned, because it's not that Shmini Atzeres is the holiday of Eretz Yisrael, but all 8 days are the holiday of Eretz Yisrael. But once we come to Eretz Yisrael, we cannot forget. We have to remember. It's in order to appreciate what happened afterwards. That's part of the mitzvah of Sukkah. Appreciating what happened afterwards. And that's why all question is, Sukkah says, man, Simcha, yes, it's the bringing in of the crops, which also is identified with Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is praised for its agriculture, for its security, the special shmira that we have in Eretz Yisrael from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's man simchasenu, because when we look back, when we sit in the Sukkah, so it's when we sit in the Sukkah, we appreciate it's man simchasenu because of the now, not because of what will happen then. But what happened then gives us an appreciation of the now. We have to look back in order to appreciate what we have now. And that's the idea of Zman Simchasenu. Since it's appreciation of Eretz Yisrael, and that's something that is identified with Simcha, with joy. So the halacha was Mitzdayer Patur min HaSukkah, because we don't want to take away from the joy of the now. We just want to remember the past in order to have the simcha of the now. So this is our understanding. In other words, the holiday of Sukkot, to a certain degree, is a holiday that commemorates the transference from the Midbar into Eretz Yisrael, from the past into the present. The Jewish people, when Yehoshua, and actually Shmini Atzeres, our minhag is that we read the first parak in Yehoshua. Yehoshua is the symbol of going into Eretz Yisrael. So it's the holiday of Eretz Yisrael. It's the Diras Kva of the Jew, the permanent dwelling of the Jew. So we have to, in other words, we have to show it's a holiday of Simcha, but we have to remember the past. So because of that, we could say Mitzdayer Patur min HaSukkah, because we don't want to take away from the simcha, which is identified with the celebration of being in Eretz Yisrael. So we could suggest that that's the reason why it is that the halacha is that mitztayer is patur in a sukkah. And according to Rabbi, if one is mitztayer, if it's raining and he sits in sukkah, he fulfills no mitzvah, because it's not just remembering the past, but it's remembering the past in order to appreciate the present. I failed to mention, but the Rambam seems to go with the Shita, and his reasoning, in the Tama Mitzvah of Sukkah, seems to be based on the Shita that the Jewish people in the desert, it was Sukkos Mamash, that they actually built huts in the desert. So, because it's hard to say about the Anane HaKavod that the idea that the purpose is to appreciate our leaving the Anane HaKavod when we went into Eretz Yisrael. It's somewhat difficult to suggest that. So the Rambam Shita in Moreh Nevuchim clearly is based on the Shita, on the opinion that in the desert the Sukkah was not Anane HaKavod, was not the clouds of glory, but it was Sukkos Mamash. And we have to, but when we look at the transference from the past into the present, we have to focus also on not making the mistakes of the present. Unfortunately, there are so many today that are making those mistakes. I'm not advocating right now anyway. And I have my opinions. I mentioned it many times about yeshiva boys going into the army or not going into the army. It's a separate question. But there shouldn't be any question of the appreciation that we should have for those who are fighting for Klal Yisrael, for those that are giving their lives for the Jewish people. We shouldn't fool ourselves to believe that if there hadn't been a Jewish state, the Arabs would welcome us. We see how the Arabs kill each other. What do you think they would have done to the Jewish people? So when we see the transference from past to the present, and all of Chumash Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu warns the Jewish people of focusing on not repeating the mistakes they made in the Midbar. And because of that, now we see that Moshe Rabbeinu, the first three makos, the first three plagues, Dam, Tzfardei, Kinim, Moshe Rabbeinu was not the one who brought, of course, through HaKadosh Baruch Hu, those plagues, but Aaron did it. Aaron got the staff of Moshe, and with the staff of Moshe, the river turned to blood. The Kinim came from the sand, because Moshe, and the Tzvardeya came from the Nile. Why did Moshe do it? Because the Nile protected Moshe. When his mother put him in a basket, he had to show Hashkaras Hatov. He had to show appreciation to the river, to the waters. So he didn't want to bring a plague on them. And Tzvardeus also, it was from the Nile. It's very odd. There's no life to them. The Nile is a river, water flowing. But if we don't show appreciation to the shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the agent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it comes to the point where we don't show appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And when we don't recognize the Jewish soldiers in Israel, we don't recognize what they did for us in saving our lives. And believe me, it's not just the lives of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael. Long term, it's the lives of the Jewish people all over the world, universally. It comes not just to not showing appreciation to them. It goes to the point of not showing appreciation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are the shlichim. They are the agents, the messengers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we have to, when we look at the transference from the past into the present, we have to understand today we don't worry, we in the United States don't worry, and even in Eretz Yisrael, in a more limited way, of course, October 7th. Perhaps there was a message in the October 7th. Perhaps, what was October 7th? It was a pogrom. You're forgetting what happened in Europe, so you're not appreciating what you're getting now. And if we forget about the shlichim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent, unfortunately, we will come to forget about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu was protecting us. So as we approach Sukkos, it's important to focus on the transference and not to make the mistakes of the past. Listen, so many mistakes were made during World War II. We're not trying to find fault with anybody. Hindsight is 20/20 vision. They didn't know. But they didn't have a Holocaust beforehand. To learn, we did. We can learn from the past. And I think that is the challenge that we face this year on Sukkot. Hopefully, there will be peace. We don't know what will happen. Al tiftachu b'nedivim v'nedam she'lo trua. But we have to remember, in order to appreciate the present, we have to remember the past. It gives us a greater ability to appreciate what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. But at the same time, we have to focus on not repeating the mistakes that we and our ancestors made. Avol anachnu b'avoseinu chatanu.
If there's any questions, please put them in the chat. There's nothing in the chat yet. Okay. So there might be a share. Yeah.
Next Sunday, I don't think so.
But there might be a share on Thursday.
Yeah.
At 11:30 Chicago time in the morning, 12:30 New York time in the early afternoon, 7:30 Israel time for Ravaron Soloveichik's Yortzeit. If we know,
We'll send out
might
notice.
send an email on Thursday, but we won't. I don't think know exactly before then. But we'll try to send that out.
Yeah, I'll try to find out today. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Have a good